Pokemon had the same names but different designs? I know that sounds really weird, but it's actually a super cool way to make new Pokemon. Like, you could take the name Mandibuzz, and instead of being based off a buzzard, you can make it a bee. And now the word Manda in Mandibuzz can mean mandible, and buzz is just the buzzing of a bee. And that's just one example. There are a ton of these old name new Pokemon designs done by an Artist Astray. They literally made over 60 of them. And we're gonna be looking through all of them today. I'm super excited because this idea is just so creative, and trust me, you are not ready for how clever these name swaps are. So let's not waste a lot of time. If you end up liking today's video, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe if you like seeing Pokemon fan art videos, because I'm posting new ones all the time. And without further ado, let's get into it. First up, we have Staryu, which instead of being a starfish is now a dragon normal type raptor creature with a very star-shaped head. And I believe here the name is supposed to be Star, which is the shape of its head, and U, which is short for youthful, because this is like the baby form of the Pokemon. It evolves into Staraptor, which is no longer the Gen 4 regional bird, but is instead this raptor creature with a lot of star patterns on its body. And I will say, as cool as this is with the whole name flipping thing, you do also have to give major credit for just how solid these designs are. Like, take away the whole name thing, this is just a very solid Pokemon design, especially a dragon normal type, which is very weird typing and hard to make, but this just works really well. This could be a real Pokemon easily. Okay, next up we have Arbok, and this one's incredibly clever. Regular Arbok's name is just the word cobra backwards, but this one is much more intricate. So for this design, they're taking the first part of the word arbor, which is Latin for tree, and combining it with bok choy to make a really cool grass type. Lumineon is no longer a forgettable Gen 4 fish Pokemon, but is instead a normal type luminescent evolution. And this one is so clever. If you don't know, all the evolutions names end with the word Eon, like Vaporeon, Leaf Eon, Flare Eon, you get it? And I never noticed it before, but Lumineon has the same ending to its name, so this is absolutely perfect for this challenge, and this evolution is also sick. Here we have Vileplume, which is still a poison type, but now it's a poison flying type bird Pokemon. So for this one, the first part of the name is still Vile because the Pokemon's supposed to be evil, but the plume part of the name now represents the plumage of this bird, because according to the Pokedex, this Pokemon stores poison inside of its wings, so its plumage is vile. Up next, we have another flying type Pokemon. This one is Timber, and the first part of the name is still supposed to be timber like wood, but the design puts a lot more emphasis on the burr part of the name, and I didn't know this. Apparently burr is a term for certain tools like drill bits, and this is a woodpecker Pokemon with a drill bit nose that it uses to get into trees. So not only is this a great design, but it's teaching me things. And it evolves into Drillbur, the name of another Gen 5 Pokemon who just so happens to have the word burr in its name, I guess. And this one basically has the same theme. It's just got a much more developed design, and it's combining the word drill with burr, which again is the term for certain tools. And I'd like to imagine if all these Pokemon were in their own name-swapped region, this would be the regional bird that you find in the early route, because it's just got that sort of design. But here's a curveball. Its third evolution is Jinx, which at first seems super random, but it's actually because this Pokemon is now based off a bird called the Eurasian Wryneck, and the scientific name of that bird is the Jinx Torquila. So that's where the Pokemon gets the name, but the design is also pretty interesting. It's got this completely flipped around neck, and it's now Steel Ghost type. And according to the Pokedex, Drillbur would only evolve into this Pokemon after an ill-fated incident, so I guess we can just fill in the blanks there. Moving on to Ice-Q, which is no longer an Ice-Q penguin, but instead a dog Pokemon who is known to rescue people from snowy environments. So the name comes from Ice and Rescue, but I also really like this design. He's just so cute with how serious he is in the face and his little ice glasses. Here's a fun one. It's Pikachu, which is now a Fire-Ice type Pokemon that's still a small mouse, but with a much different theme. So again, this Pokemon is an ice type, so it's putting more emphasis on the chew part of the name because this Pokemon has a constant cold and is sneezing. So the chew part is like, chew, the sound you make when you sneeze. So for this one, I just genuinely like the design of the Pokemon. Its name is Pansage, and it's a fighting psychic type Panda Sage. And I'm not really sure why the original is even called Pansage. It's not a panda, and I'm not sure what sage means in that name, but it makes a lot more sense here, honestly. And again, this design is just sick. It kind of reminds me of Urshifu, my favorite Pokemon. Here we have Elekid, which is still a pure electric type Pokemon, but with a much different design because it's an electric kid, this time kid being the term for a baby goat. And I really like the horns this thing has. The fact they're in little like thunderbolt shapes is really cute. And Elekid now evolves into Rampardos, which is no longer based on ramming into things, but is instead a literal ram. But also to fit into the electric type, there's a term Ampere, which is a unit of measurement for electrical currents. So you can see the name as ram and ampere, and dos, which is Spanish for two, because this thing has 2 2 horns and 2 lightning bolts at the end of its tail. A little complicated on this one, but it's really cool. What's up, y'all? You know, all this talk about reinventing Pokemon has me thinking about the fact that it's New Year's right now, and if you're anything like me, you're trying to make some positive changes and reinvent yourself just a little bit for this new year. And one of the ways you can think about doing that is with today's video sponsor, BetterHelp. If you haven't heard of it before, BetterHelp is an online platform that can connect you to a licensed professional therapist. And the process is super easy to get started. You can go to betterhelp.com using the link in my bio. And from there, you'll fill out a questionnaire that'll be used to connect you to the perfect therapist in as little as a couple days. And if the therapist you're assigned isn't quite the right fit, you can easily change therapists for no additional charge. And with BetterHelp's network of over 30,000 licensed therapists who have a wide array of experience and specialties, you know there's one in there for you. And if there's ever a time to use BetterHelp services, it's now, when we're just coming off this holiday season and everything is so full of stress, and it can be particularly hard to transition back into your regular routine. That's exactly where talking to a BetterHelp therapist can be good for you. They can help you transition back into the normalcy of life and start you off on the right foot for this new year. If you're interested at all, check out the link in my bio and use the code FILLERS for 10% off of your first month. And that's FILLERS like my channel name, FILLERS. Again, if you're interested at all, link in bio, code FILLERS for 10% off your first month. Big thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring today's video, but now let's get right back into it. Up next, we have another one that evolves. It's Young Goose, which is now a water psychic type goose Pokemon who's young. And it's also got this whole carnival theme going on, like it's juggling these bubbles, which makes more sense when you see its evolution, Zangoose, which is still a goose who's acting zany. And I love this one because it's just so different from the Pokemon it's based off. The original Zangoose is just so serious and intimidating, and this is a carnival goose. I really like this one. This is Armaldo. It's a ground steel type Pokemon that has a very solid design. This is the exact type of Pokemon I like, just sort of tanky looking things. For this one, the name is supposed to be Armadillo combined with the word old because this is an elderly armadillo, which you can tell from its gray hair and its closed eyes that almost look like the Pokemon has gone blind. Again, really cool design that looks nothing like the original. Okay, this one's really interesting. Stay with me here. This is Celio, which is the name of the Gen 3 Seal Pokemon. But this version is actually a convergent evolution of Litleo, which is the Gen 5 Lion Pokemon. So the name is a combination of Seal and Litleo, and it's this seal-like Litleo that still has its fire powers, but instead of breathing fire, it shoots hot rocks out of its mouth. And it evolves into Incineroar, which is a convergent evolution of Pyroar, with the first part of the name still meaning incinerate. And this one's just so complicated. Think about this. They took an old name and made a new convergent evolution of a different Pokemon with it. This is just, we're in so deep at this point. This is crazy. Okay, this one's so funny to me. It's Sentret, but instead of being a little like squirrel creature, it's a Sentry Turret. And that is just so funny to me. This is also a very interesting design for a Pokemon. It's pure steel type, and it's a Pokeball on its side with a cannon coming out of it. It's absolutely crazy. Everything about this is crazy. But we're not done yet. It evolves into Toucannon, which is no longer a toucan, but another Sentry Turret with 2 cannons. I also really like what they're doing with this line, where the first Pokemon is based off a Pokeball, and this one's based off a Great Ball. That's very clever to me. And its final evolution is Miltank, which has nothing to do with the word milk, and is instead a combination of military and tank. It's now also based off an Ultra Ball, which is just so cool. And I really just can't get over how clever this one is. All 3 of these names worked absolutely perfect. Up next, we have Breloom, one of my favorite Pokemon of all time, turned into a dark flying type Pokemon. And this Pokemon is shaped like an umbrella, but it's also very sad and gloomy, so the name is a combination of umbrella and gloom to make Breloom. And it evolves into Marshadow, the Gen 7 mythical Pokemon, which now has a design based off the Black Heron, which is a bird that lives in marshes. And when you combine that with the fact that this Pokemon still has the whole umbrella theme going on, where it's blocking the sun and making shadows, you get Marshadow, Marsh, and Shadow. Here's Amoris, which instead of being a fossil Pokemon, is now a normal steel-type bull Pokemon wearing golden armor, with the name this time being a combination of Aurum, which is the Latin word for gold, and Taurus, which means bull. And I'd almost picture this as some sort of regional evolution to Tauros, because it looks pretty similar, and it's similar in the name, and I think that'd be really cool. Barbroach is now a barbed cockroach, which actually makes a lot more sense with the name, and it's bug dark type. And again, this is a situation where I don't really know why the original Pokemon has that name, and the name makes much more sense on a design like this, where it's much more literal. This one's really funny. It's Pupitar, but in this version, I guess it would be pronounced Puppitar, because it's a puppy with a scimitar. Like, it literally has a sword in its mouth, and this built-in headband across its forehead, and these wrappings on its legs. This design is crazy, but super likable. And if you thought that was good, here's Samurott, which is no longer a starter Pokemon, but a fighting steel type Samurai Rottweiler. And at this point, I just have to wonder, how did the artist come up with this? It's just so clever. I don't know how anyone's mind could work this way. It's just so perfect. And again, the design, absolutely crazy, but very likable. I could honestly see it being in a real Pokemon game. I don't know if it could have the actual sword in its mouth, but the rest of the design is very realistic. This is another one that's hard to wrap your head around. This is Quilladin, which is the middle stage of the Generation 6 grass type starter. But in this version, it's a variation of Quilava, which is the middle stage of the Gen 2 fire type starter. And its name, instead of being Quill, which is like the quills on the porcupine that Quilladin is, it's the first part of the name Quilava combined with Paladin. Again, hard to wrap your head around, but all you need to know is we end up with this super awesome design that honestly looks like a different variation of Typhlosion. Like, a lot of Pokemon have completely different designs depending on if they're male or female, and I could see this being like a female Typhlosion or something like that. It looks sort of like that to me. Here's another one based on a starter Pokemon. This is Charmeleon, which normally is a combination of Char, like fire, like to char something, and Chameleon. But this one takes a spin on it, turning it into a water type and making it a Charming Chameleon. And this one just looks absolutely goofy to me. Like, the swooping blonde hair fin is very funny. And overall, he's just a dapper gentleman. And it even evolves into Empoleon. However, I think this one would be pronounced Empoleon because it's an Emperor Chameleon. And again, super clever because they're making a design based off a different pronunciation of the name, which is just crazy to me. And the design is super solid. This also feels like a starter Pokemon. If the next generation had this as the water type starter, I'd be completely happy with that. Here's another really funny one. It's Carnivine, which is usually a combination of carnivorous and vine, but this one is a combination of carnival and bovine, which makes a normal fairy type clown buffalo. And I even think this was supposed to be a Convergent evolution or regional Bofalant, which is the Gen 5 buffalo Pokemon, because they pretty much look exactly the same, but this one has a much goofier appearance with a rainbow wig, rings around its horns, and built-in clown costume. Here we have Dwebble, which in this variation has a much different appearance, sort of being this humanoid cave worker design, because this one gets its name from the word dwarf and pebble, because it's this small little guy who works with rocks. But its evolution is not small at all. Its name is Kyogre, but again, it would be pronounced differently. This one would be called Kyogre, because it's getting its name from Kyo, the Japanese word for giant, and ogre, which is a giant mythological creature. Now, of course, the name flipping on this one is super clever, but I also just like the theme of a very small rock-type Pokemon turning into this giant beast when it evolves. That's just very cool. Like, I'd like to imagine Dwebble is a super weak Pokemon that you find very early in the game, and it takes forever to evolve, so you're like midway through the game wondering when this weak little thing is going to be useful at all. And then it evolves into this giant beast who's now the strongest Pokemon on your team and is a huge payoff for never giving up on that little guy. Next up, we have Manaphy, the Gen 4 mythical Pokemon, which is now a grass ghost type manatee Pokemon. Now, obviously, the first part of the name here, mana, is coming from manatee, but the second part of the name is coming from eutrophy, which is a term for a body of water that got taken over by plant life, like algae and stuff like that, which is why this Pokemon's back is covered in this ghostly algae substance. Here we have Wimpod, and this one's interesting because the original Pokemon gets its name from Wimpy and Isolapod, and this one also gets its name from Wimpy and Pod, but this time the pod is from Peapod. So they're both Wimpy, they're just in different pods, and this design is really funny as well because if you look, all three of them are slowly getting more and more upset. Like, the first P is just kind of tearing up, the second one is crying, and the third one is bawling. And it evolves into Metapod, which in the original name is a combination of Metamorphosis and Pod. However, in this version, it's Metal and Pod, because instead of being wimpy, all three of the Ps are now decked out in iron armor and ride around in their pod like an ancient Roman battleship. And this might be my favorite of the entire episode. It's really clever, and the design is unique and likable. This is another really funny one. It's Bagon, which instead of being the first stage of a Gen 3 pseudo-legendary, is a dark ghost type possessed bag. Like, it's literally a backpack with teeth and a tongue. And I actually really like Pokemon like this. I think they're called object Pokemon because they're just a ghost possessing an everyday item. And I think a lot of people hate them, but I don't see why. They're pretty clever to me. Like, this design is super cool. But what makes it even better is it now evolves into Avalug, which is a possessed suitcase with the lug part of the name being luggage. What more can you say? They took the giant ice dinosaur behemoth Avalug and turned it into a possessed suitcase. This is the funniest Fakemon trend I've ever seen. Here we have another one that's based off a different pronunciation of the original Pokemon. So this is Giratina, but it would be pronounced Giratina because it's a steel-type giraffe Pokemon that has a very weathered appearance. So it gets its name from giraffe and patina, with patina being the process of weathering away metal. And this design actually reminds me a lot of Copperajah, and I feel like elephants and giraffes go together in real life as well, so I feel like these Pokemon would be best friends. This one's a tongue twister. This is Bramblin, which is now a normal flying type Pokemon whose name comes comes from brambling and rambling, with brambling being a species of bird and rambling being a type of singing because this Pokemon is singing. And it's also got a key theme to it. If you look on its chest, it's got a keyhole and the top of its head looks like a key, which plays into its evolution Trapinch, which is no longer a Gen 3 Pokemon, but a trapped finch, which is super clever, but also the design of this Pokemon is incredibly unique. It would be really cool to see it in a real game if a Pokemon was constantly in a cage like this. Like, how would that play into the gameplay? Would it be like super slow but very defensive because the cage protects it but also restricts it? I don't know, I have a lot of questions about this. It's very thought-provoking. And its final evolution is Braviary, which is now a combination of Bravo, Brambling, and Aviary. Try saying that 3 times fast. And if I thought the design of the middle stage was unique, I don't know what to think about this one. It's absolutely crazy. Instead of being trapped in the cage, it's just embraced it and is now a performing singer? I don't know what in the world's going on with this design. I do also notice it's not even a flying type, it's normal steel type, so I guess that's a reference to the fact that it literally can't fly because it's in a cage. This thing is all over the place, but it absolutely works to me. I genuinely like this Pokemon. Up next, we have Probopass, which is now a pure fighting type Pokemon, and this one's really interesting because this is supposed to be an evolution of the Pokemon Passimian. Now, Passimian is a Pokemon that's based off sports, so of course its evolution is as well, and that's where the word pass comes into play, like how you pass a ball in sports. I believe this one's specifically playing rugby. But anyway, the first part of this thing's name, Probo, is now coming from the Proboscis monkey, which is a type of monkey that the design hails from. And I know I've said it a bunch, but again, this is just so creative. They took an old name and made a new Pokemon who's an evolution of an old Pokemon. Okay, this one is another one that's pretty complicated, but super cool. It's Escavalier, which is now an electric ghost type fish-looking Pokemon. And the first part of the name is Esca, which apparently is the term for the lure at the end of an anglerfish. Like, you know how anglerfish have that light up ball attached to them that they use to lure in prey? That's apparently called an Esca. Now, the second part of the name is Cavalier, which apparently means like a guy that will escort a lady. Because according to the Pokedex, the male species of this Pokemon will float around in the ocean and put on a light show in order to attract the female of their species. And it evolves into Illumise. However, again, this is one that's pronounced differently because this thing's name would actually be Illumise. And I bet you probably didn't even know that Illumise's name was pronounced that way. It's like French. It's weird. I only know that because I'm a Pokemon YouTuber. Yeah, this thing's name is Illumise because it's like a scary deep ocean creature that illuminates the darkness around it and will lead you to your demise. Illuminated demise, Illumise. This next one is part of a 3-stage evolution line, so it's gonna get really complicated. This first stage name is Weedle, which is based off the Gen 1 bug Pokemon, and this is a different bug Pokemon who takes inspiration from a different bug called a Weevil, and it's combining it with the word needle to get Weedle, but I'm pretty sure the original Weedle was based off the word needle anyway, so I guess that's kind of the same. It evolves into Weavile, which is still based off a Weevil, but this one is Vile, implying it's more evil. And I actually really like the design of this Pokemon. The color palette is super cool, and I like the element of that nose barrel that it has that probably shoots out needles from its face. This just reminds me of those classic bug Pokemon like Heracross and stuff like that that always end up being fan favorites. Now, the third stage kind of comes out of nowhere. Its name is Boltund because it's based off the Bull Weevil, a different type of Weevil, and it's also based off the word rotund because its body is very round. But compared to the middle stage, this Pokemon just doesn't seem to fit. Like, where'd that barrel nose go? That was my favorite part about the design, and it's just gone now. I'm not sure why, but I'll be honest, this one's a little disappointing. Okay, this one is absolutely sick. It's Wynot, which is usually like a comedy relief Pokemon, but this one is a Dragon Water type legendary Pokemon. For the name, it's now a combination of Wyvern, which is the mythological creature that this is based off, and the word nautical because it's got a sea inspiration. As we can see, its tail is in the shape of a trident, which is Poseidon's weapon. And that's gonna do it for today's episode, y'all. I hope you thought that was as cool as I did, because I thought that was one of the coolest Fakemon trends I've ever seen. And I'm actually really curious. Let me know in the comments if y'all can come up with any ideas that would fit this trend as well, like a new way to take a Pokemon name and make it a different type of creature, because I'd love to see what y'all are able to come up with. But anyways, if you liked today's video, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe before you go, and if you want to see more Pokemon fan art videos, there's a bunch in this playlist. Thanks for watching, I'll see you in the next video, but until then, peace.